cross fingers.
Okay.
We see your share screen too.
The second Mishnah of chapter 1 of Yevamot starts off with a question. Ketzad, how? How do these women exempt their rival wives? So it gives an example. If, for example, his daughter or any one of those women with whom relations are forbidden was married to his brother, and this brother had another wife, and the brother died, then just as his daughter is exempt because it's his daughter, that's a forbidden relationship, so too the rival wife is exempt. Okay, that's pretty simple. Well, now we get a little more complicated.
Except, I mean, just to ask a question, I mean, your brother's wife is forbidden too.
Oh, certainly his brother's wife is forbidden.
So that gets
according, well.
So if he overrides that one, why doesn't it override the other ones too?
Because the brother's wife is forbidden normally. However, the way the rabbis deal with the problem, and it's a real problem, because as I pointed out earlier, the verse 16 in chapter 18 of Leviticus specifically states that you cannot have sex with your brother's wife. But how do you do the levirate marriage then? So the tradition puts it, well, yes, normally you can't, but in this specific situation, when the man dies without an heir, then that supersedes the commandment of not having sex with your brother's wife. You can, in fact, you must, unless there is another reason besides that it's your brother's wife. In other words, if it's related in another way to the brother, the surviving brother, then you can't do it. But otherwise, the commandment of levirate marriage supersedes the commandment not having sex with your brother's wife.
I have a question.
Yes, Elliot, please.
Is the assumption that I assume, so this is from the Talmud. The Talmud was put together by very learned men. Is the assumption that these rules and regulations basically are coming from God, and the rabbis are specifying what they are? Some of these make a lot of sense, but I just wonder, this is so detailed and complex. Is the assumption all of this is ordered divinely?
Yeah, well, this was all passed on orally. In other words, the assumption of Pharisaic Judaism, we've talked about this before, is that in addition to the written Torah, at Sinai, Moses received what became the oral Torah, written down in the Mishnah and the Gemara. But this was oral, and he passed it on orally to Joshua, who passed it on to the elders, who passed it on to the prophets, who passed it on to the men of the great assembly, who passed it on to the pairs, ending with Hillel and Shammai, who passed it on to the rabbis.
So an assumption is this is in accordance with divine dictates, divine will.
That's the principle. That it goes back to Moses.
Uh-huh.
That's the understanding.
Yeah.
And that's what gives it its power. Okay. Yes, Nelson.
Well, I think there's a problem with marriage in general that needs to be, I don't know, it has to be discussed with the rabbis, but why is it that when a rabbi performs a marriage, it's okay? Now, I understand in the traditional Judaism, the man can have sex with anyone he chooses if he's not married, except maybe his sisters or something. But the girl can't. But once she's married, she can have sex with her husband. Why? And it's not that God present at the ceremony?
I'm sure you have heard at Jewish weddings, the rabbi talk about the word for man in Hebrew is ish, aleph, yud, shin. Okay, so without the yud, aleph, shin is aish, which means fire. It takes three to make a marriage work. If you don't have the yud there, if you don't have God there, then you have aish. Not good.
I've known a few fiery women, Rabbi.
So, there are all kinds of wonderful agadot. After God created the universe, what's he been doing? Well, he's been putting people together, right? He's been figuring out who fits together. And so when you find your bashert, when you find the one that's meant for you, you can thank God because he's the one who caused that marriage.
Rabbi,
Yes.
how do you explain this in terms of the relatively high divorce rate?
You didn't find the
Did
right
God
one.
make mistakes in terms of matching
No,
people up?
No, it's not God's problem. It's the people. They made a mistake. God doesn't make any mistakes. He finds the bashert.
What's the rabbi doing there?
Huh? What, Elson?
Why do you need a rabbi?
You don't need a rabbi.
Oh, you don't.
You need
You don't need a
witnesses.
rabbi. One of the strange things about Judaism, you don't need a rabbi for a wedding. All you need are two witnesses who are kosher witnesses and who see the groom recite the harayat and puts a ring on her finger. Why do we need a rabbi today? Because of civil law, not because of Jewish law. You don't need a rabbi for a wedding. You don't need a rabbi for a bris. You don't need a rabbi for a funeral. You don't need a rabbi for anything except to teach you. That's what a rabbi is supposed to do.
Can a son marry his mother? Rabbi,
Huh?
can a son marry his mother?
Oh, no.
A son who, no, I don't mean that. I mean a son who is a rabbi marry his mother who'll be marrying a second husband.
Sure. I'm telling you, the rabbi has no function in a wedding. It's the witnesses. The rabbi can't sign the ketubah for his mother's wedding. That's the problem. The witnesses count, not the rabbi. The rabbi doesn't do anything. Yes, I know we God forbid you should get married without a rabbi. It's increasingly the case. one of the first thing I read on Sunday morning in the Times is the style section. I read about weddings and love stories and so forth before I read the bad news. You know, it's like the joke about the guy who reads the Nazi newspapers to find out good things about the Jews before he reads about the real newspaper and all the tzores that we face, right? So, you know, the Nazis think we own the world and we're very rich and we control everything. And so that's what I do. I read the style section first. It seems to me that there are an increasing number of people who are not using clergy. From a Jewish perspective, you don't need a rabbi. From a American law professor, the rabbi is serving as an officer of the court. In some states, you have to prove that you're a rabbi. I remember it was in Virginia. When we lived in Virginia, one of the students asked me to do his wedding. And so I had to inquire, what do I do? Well, you have to own property to go and register as a clergy person to do weddings. Or you have to bring somebody who can attest to your validity as a clergy person who does own property. Well, we're in Virginia, and we just had gotten our first Black professor in the Department of Religious Studies. And he owned a lovely home with a pool. He invited us. We spent, you know, with the kid, with Sharon, at their pool, and he became a good friend of ours. And so I asked him to come to the court. Of course, it was Virginia, and I purposely wanted to bring my Black professor who owned property, and this white guy needed a Black guy in order to sign to be recognized as clergy. I became an officer of the court thanks to my Black colleague. I remember we wanted to join a swimming club. So we called and said, "Do you allow Blacks?" "Oh, God, no. Thank you. We're not interested." This was in the late 60s when I was teaching at the University of Virginia. It was still very problematic, all this stuff. It was an interesting time. But anyhow, it's important, you know, you don't need a rabbi to conduct a service. All you need are 10 people, one of whom knows what page to start on. That's all you need for a service. You don't need a rabbi. You don't need a cantor. We don't have clergy. Judaism traditionally has no clergy. You can't have a mass without a priest, but you can have all the services you want without a rabbi. You don't need a rabbi for anything, not for life cycle and not for liturgical purposes. A rabbi should be a teacher. That's what it means. We have in, at least in the non-Orthodox world, we copied the Christian model. How can you start without the rabbi? You know, and the rabbi sits on the pulpit and faces, even the cantor has to face the congregation. That's not Jewish. The person davening is davening facing God, facing Jerusalem, not facing the congregation and leading prayers. He's praying for himself. And everybody else has to pray for themselves. But we've copied, and not to our benefit in my view, but we've copied the Christian model and turned the rabbi and the cantor around to lead something. And how can you have a service without, how can you start? The rabbi's not here. We won't know what page to start on. It's one of the real
what is
problems.
the role of the shaliach tzibur?
Anybody
Is that person playing for himself or herself, or on behalf of the
Absolute-
congregation, or who?
No, the shaliach tzibur is praying for him or herself. However, for instance, in the repetition of the Amidah, then if people say Amen, for those, remember, people didn't have Sidurim. Today we know everybody has a siddur. The congregation has hundreds of Sidurim. There was no printing press. It was very rare to have a Siddur. So in the repetition of the Amidah, then the Shaliach Tzibur is praying for the community. But the community has to listen and has to say Amen. But in the rest of the service, no. The Shaliach Tzibur is just kind of keeping people together more or less. That's all. But anybody can be a Shaliach Tzibur who knows and can, who's able to do it. Anyhow, let's go back to our Mishnah. I have, as you can tell, a pet peeve about the rabbinate and what it has become.
You could put
It's
a lot
changing.
of people out of business.
It's changing.
Yeah. You could put a lot of people out of business if everyone finds out that rabbis aren't needed for ceremonies. Oh, you're on mute again. Rabbi, you're on mute again.
It goes to the one of the problems with the conservative movement was that when kids came back from Ramah and they knew how to daven and they knew where prayers were, the rabbi was still telling them when to stand and when to sit. They knew when to stand and when to sit. They didn't need a rabbi to tell them we continue on page 34. They had davened every day and they knew the service. And they could lead the service because they did at camp. But the most conservative congregations were still having the rabbi telling everybody, now please rise for the Baruch Hu. Please sit, please rise, please sit. We continue on page 35. Kids who know don't need that information, thank you. But the conservative congregation, I remember towards the end of his life, he denied he ever said it. I heard it with my own ears. Rabbi Armin Cohn, Alav Shalom, Park Synagogue, many years ago when I was in high school, he said, we're not sending our kids to Camp Ramah because when they come back, they don't like our services. At the end of his life, I mentioned it to him. He said he never said that. I attest, he did say it, and I heard it. And he was right, absolutely right. But the problem was the service never changed. And so kids who went to Ramah and were serious either became rabbis, they made aliyah, or most of them joined more traditional Orthodox, modern Orthodox congregations, or what we have now in Cleveland. And I enjoyed it very much when I was invited to a bat mitzvah, a partnership minyan, where men and women participate, but there's a mechitza, and it's a traditional service. So those kinds of things appeal to people who know, even though they grew up in a conservative congregation.
Rabbi, B'nai Yeshurun has changed over the years.
Absolutely, and it's continuing to change now with Cantor Schiffman leaving and a woman coming to be the cantor. That's going to be a major change, and but you know, change is inevitable.
Under Cantor Meisels, the services were a concert.
Absolutely. But we had a concert on Friday night with the choir and the organ. And on Saturday morning, we had a davening that was traditional. There was no English except maybe for Ashrei and the sermon. Otherwise, everything was done, and it was done in Hebrew. No skipping, no triennial cycle. The whole Torah portion was read. Everything was, that's what I used to joke. What made it a conservative congregation? On Friday night, the service was Reform. On Saturday morning, the service was Orthodox. That made it conservative. Today, at least at B'nai Yeshurun, a Friday night is, it's more or less like Thursday night with a few extra people. Unless there's a special deal like the band playing in the summer when people bring their kids. But it's not like it used to be. The choir only sings on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. No choir, and of course no organ, which we used to have at B'nai Yeshurun when it was Temple on the Heights. So things have changed and will continue to change. The only problem is, while change is inevitable, growth is optional. Nothing stays steady, not in this world. Everything is dynamic. If you don't move forward, you move backward.
Rabbi, wouldn't you say that the problem exists for people of older generations who think things should be conducted a certain way and have trouble adjusting to these changes?
Absolutely.
So they feel they have trouble relating to something. Conservative Judaism is not what it was years ago. Orthodox Judaism may be too much for some people. So how do you save the middle ground? You remember that the contribution you made to the Jewish think tank on saving the middle ground, i.e. conservative Judaism, but yet it is changing.
Well, I think a human problem, the human problem is change is inevitable, but the strongest force in the world is inertia. So there's a natural resistance to change. And that's one of the things that and particularly with religious institutions. In general, we resist change. We like the way things are. That's a natural kind of thing. That's what the strongest force in nature is, inertia. and yet change is inevitable. But we think we're standing still. We're not. Nothing stands still that's alive. Either we move ahead or we move back.
So moving ahead, would that necessarily imply better or just change? Perhaps moving
Change.
ahead, according
That's
to some people, is regression in other ways.
That's what I say. That's what I say, that growth is optional. Change is inevitable, but growth is optional.
Change runs in both directions.
Absolutely. But it's going to change. Everything is going to change. We're dealing now in a period of tremendous change. Change doesn't always happen at the same pace. I would say the changes that occurred between, say, the time of the Mishnah and the 16th century, 17th century, 18th century were very, very slow. But the changes since then have been very, very fast, and especially in the 20th century. Tremendous amount of change. We have to find the way to deal in the world in which we are presented with, which is very, very different from the world in which we grew up. You know,
Rabbi,
I mean,
we're speaking about change. Has JTS changed its admission requirements to kind of keep up with these changes that are taking place in the world?
I don't know, but I just heard on Tuesday that JTS has 5 students coming into the rabbinical school. 5 students.
That's pretty sad.
Well,
how many are female? 5 out of 5 female?
I don't know. I'm going to have to ask. I don't know. I didn't hear this from JTS. I heard it from a friend who said he heard it from JTS. So from somebody who works at JTS. In fact, we'll find out, because the rabbi who's coming to B'nai Yeshurun to lead the other service is the director of admissions at the rabbinical and cantorial schools. So we'll be able to ask him how many students are coming in, and you can ask him whether they have changed the admission requirements.
Well, when we bring on Tristan Newman, who's, as you know, wants to become a conservative rabbi, we'll get his impression of this. Hopefully,
yeah, well,
we're going to get him to.
It's an interesting time and a challenging time, no question about it. Okay, you see the text now?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay, so this second Mishnah continues to say, if his daughter's rival wife, in other words, there's a relationship between the brother-in-law and the former wife, the widow of his brother. So they can't do yibum. Then, if this woman has a rival wife, and the rival wife went and married another brother of her ex-husband, and that other brother had already another wife, and he dies without a child, both brothers now have died, then this rival wife comes before the first brother-in-law, the daughter's father, for levirate marriage, And then, just as his daughter's rival wife is exempt, so too the rival wife of her rival wife is exempt. In other words, what's happened here is a kind of a continuation. Once one of the wives is forbidden, then if they continue the line, then they remain ineligible for yibum, even if the dead brother has 100 brothers, and each of them has
No heir.
plural wives. All of them are exempt if, in the first case, the brother-in-law cannot marry the widow. If a woman is exempt from levirate marriage because she is the rival wife of a forbidden relative, or the rival wife of a rival wife of this kind, and she herself has an additional rival wife, then also this rival wife is exempt and exempts her own rival wives. How so?
Are not portions of this read on Yom Kippur, forbidden relationships? It seems to me that this is the case. And why would this, if that's so, why would it be read on the holiest day of the year? And if there is a real dispute, would they have gone to the then Beis Din to resolve that?
No. I think I mentioned that Yom Kippur in Mishnaic times was not like it is today. A Yom Kippur was like Tu B'Av, when the unmarried girls would go out to the orchards dressed in borrowed white dresses, and the young unmarried men would go out after them, and it would be a time for young couples to meet. And that's the explanation of why these laws are read in Mincha on Yom Kippur.
Didn't
Obviously,
they do that on Lag Bomer as well? Was
no,
that later time?
it was it was Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, and Yom Kippur. And in Masechet Ta'anit, it says there were the two happiest days of the Jewish calendar are Tu B'Av and Yom Kippur. And then that's where this ritual is described. It's in Masechet Ta'anit. Yes, Nelson.
I understand about the wife, the brother's wife, who is the daughter, because
Yes.
you're forbidden to your daughter anyway.
Yes.
But why the rivals? Is there a theory as to why it becomes transitive? Why it passes from one woman to the next?
The Mishnah, as we have seen it, doesn't explain why. Okay, but I will do a little research to find out what the traditional explanations are. I have a suspicion. I'll let you know next week. I have a suspicion that there are more than one explanation of why, which basically means we don't know. But let me research that and see what the tradition says as to why these rival wives are also exempt. My take on it is kind of a move to keep the law while limiting it. In other words, we will see, God willing, that capital cases are still in the Torah. If you break Shabbat, you are committing a tremendous sin. And however, when it comes to the court and how the court examines witnesses, you cannot possibly get two witnesses to testify that they warned that person before he did it and told him what the punishment would be, and two witnesses who were not related, both of them testifying exactly the same. So basically, what they did was they kept the law, but it was really not enforced. The tradition says that a court that sentenced one person to death was a hanging court. I'm suggesting that this all is designed to limit the number of cases where this law would apply. Keeping the law, but limiting it to basically make it almost, not quite, but almost never to be followed.
But you
Of
mean
course,
the letter of marriage was never followed?
Huh? What?
Marriage was never followed.
If you exempt, in a case of plural marriage, which I guess was quite common until the 10th century among Jews, that you, if one was forbidden, then all of them would be forbidden. So it's a way of keeping the law on the books, but not applying it very widely.
So, but the
Rabbi,
law,
since Rabbi Gershom, has anyone ever tried to make an appeal, a strong appeal for reinstatement of polygamy?
No, not to my knowledge. Nelson? Oh, Karen, go ahead.
Rabbi, what I don't understand is if the rival wife is forbidden to this guy, if the guy dies, let's say brother B dies, and the rival wife is forbidden to brother A, how can she marry brother C?
No, the case is not a levirate marriage. Now, let me get it back. If his daughter's rival wife subsequently went and married another brother,
Yeah.
this is not through Yibum, but
Okay. Okay. He doesn't have to marry her, he just married her.
they decide to get married. It's not a Yibum.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah. Thank
He
you.
was permitted to her. There's no family relationship, this rival wife. The first wife had a relationship, and therefore she is not subject to Yibum or Chalitza. And that frees the rival wife too. And therefore, if she marries again another brother, and this brother too dies without a son, she already, because of the first relationship, is freed from Yibum or Chalitza. because of the first relationship, that continues. And if it goes further and further and further, they're all exempt. Even if there are 100 brothers, the same logic applies. Okay? Okay, so let's finish this Mishnah. It continues. Ketzad, again, the word ketzad. How? How does this to be understood? What are the cases in which, if they died, their rival wives are permitted? Oh, we've learned that the rival wives are not permitted. So now the Mishnah is continuing to say, well, but there are cases when the rival wives are permitted. Im metu tzarotehem mutarot hayta vito o achat mikol ha'arayot ha'elu nusua la'achiv v'lo isha acheret meta vito o nitgasha v'achar kach met achiv tzarata muteret. So there is a case where the rival wife would have yibum. How is that? If one's daughter or any one of those women with whom relations are forbidden was married to the deceased, and this brother had another wife, and then the first wife dies or was divorced, and afterwards the brother died, then the rival wife is allowed to marry as a levirate marriage the brother. And the principle here is because of the nature of the verse in Deuteronomy, where we learn about levirate marriage. It starts off saying, when brothers dwell together. And the tradition understands that to mean while both are alive. If they're not both alive at the same time, if both brothers are not alive at the same time, then levirate marriage does not apply. Again, I would argue, this is again limiting the application of this law. Let me finish the second Mishnah. Oops. Where are we? No. That's the first Mishnah. And the second Mishnah, okay. Finally, the Mishnah states another principle. If any of these forbidden relatives was a minor who could refuse her husband. In other words, we've talked about this in the first Mishnah. This is called Me'un, Mem Aleph Nun. And it is a case of a girl, a minor, whose parents set up a marriage with a man while she was still a minor. When she reaches the age of 12 and a half, she can say, I don't want to marry him. So in this case, she didn't do that. And the husband dies without any heir. Her rival wife, she has another wife. The deceased had another wife. This other wife is obligated to perform chalitza and does not enter into yibum. Why? The rival wife of a woman who was promised in marriage to her husband and could have refused because she was still a minor, it's not really a complete marriage. She is not entirely exempt from levirate marriage and must be released by chalitza because the marriage of the forbidden relative was not a fully valid marriage. Therefore, by Torah law, the other woman is not really considered a rival wife. Now, we're making a distinction here between what is Torah law and what is rabbinic law. The rabbis consider this marriage of this that was entered into when the woman, the wife, was still a minor, and she could, when she becomes old enough, she can refuse. The rabbis consider that a real marriage. But from a perspective of the Torah, it's not a real marriage. And therefore, her rival wife is not a completely rival wife according to the Torah. And therefore, rebum is not permitted, but there is some kind of a relationship, and therefore she has to do chalitza. If you I a little bit overwhelmed, I understand. What I am interested in doing here is not that we understand exactly. I mean, this what the tradition does is give a name to everybody. So, for instance, let me read this one as Steinsaltz explains it. Just 1 minute. Daughter, just 1 minute. Achot Kalato. Wait just 1 minute. That we totally. Wait. Sorry. Okay. Jeez. Can't. Oh. So this is the first Mishnah. Where's this? The second Mishnah. Okay. If it, no, I guess he doesn't really do this in this case. Let me read another one. The wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. Reuven and Shimon are paternal brothers. Reuven married Penina, and then he dies. After his death, a third brother, Levi, was born. For Levi, Penina is the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist, as he was not alive while she was married to his brother. Consequently, if Shimon entered into a levirate marriage with Penina and subsequently died childless, Penina remains forbidden to Levi due to the fact that for a period of time between Levi's birth and Shimon's levirate marriage, she was forbidden to Levi as the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. Penina's rival wife, Hannah, is likewise exempt from chalitza and levirate marriage. So what you see here is in the way the tradition understands all this stuff is to give names to the various brothers and the wives, and then it's easier to understand. It becomes very complex, and that therefore these diagrams are very helpful. Again, my interest is in taking a broader view rather than following all of these things. The basic principle is, in my view, is that there are limiting how common this practice was. Questions?
Did any
Yes,
of these
Bob. Bob.
Did any of these practically happen, or is this just an academic exercise? These far-reaching.
This is a general question on which there is debate and lack of consensus. It is my view, and I'm not alone, but it is my view that some of this is theoretical and never occurred and never would occur. But they're kind of arguing possibilities and limits, seeing limitations and so forth. And I mean, to have 100 sons, I don't think that's so. There are. The truth of the matter is that probably the answer is depending on the situation. Some of these things, I'm sure, were possible. Some of them, I think, are more a kind of a theoretical debate. Remember what we're talking about. This is a group of scholars who are wrestling with a biblical text and trying to make sense out of it and apply it into their world. It's not. It's not. Later on, obviously, it has a force of law, but as they are building it up in the Mishnah, I see it as more theoretical than practical.
Rabbi,
Yes,
I
Nelson.
wonder if today, if someone were to lose his brother-in-law, and there would be a brother who would be interested in marrying his former brother-in-law's wife, what a modern-day conservative rabbi would say to that.
He'd probably send him to an Orthodox rabbi. Yes, Nelson? At least I would. Go ahead, Nelson. I can't hear you, Nelson.
I'm sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
This is also theoretical in another way, as much as sacrifice was.
Yes.
After the year 1000 in Europe, nobody had a legal rival wife.
No question. No question.
So we might have Eliot's case about simple cases, but nothing common. But on the other hand, Eliot's case raises another kind of issue. If you send him to an Orthodox rabbi, there's a solution, maybe. But the rabbi, you need a rabbi at a marriage to legally decide that this is a legal relationship.
Yes.
So
yes. Well,
by themselves aren't enough.
That is true. But the rabbi there is acting like a judge, giving an opinion, a legal opinion. For that you need a rabbi. Yes. But not to do the wedding.
Got it.
Okay. All right. We will meet, God willing, next week and move ahead on this. I also hopefully will have another guide done by a physicist, an Israeli physicist, who published something probably similar to what Steinsaltz has here with the men in blue and the women in red, and the relationships and everything else to try and help understand what's involved. In any case, my argument is this is mainly theoretical, but in an attempt to limit the practice while keeping it on the books. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful, enjoyable week with good weather and air conditioning. Air conditioning. Take care.